Thank you very much. I really shouldn't be here. If in my youth I had had more self-esteem, if I'd been tougher and surer of myself, I would never have become the sort of person who gets invited to give talks about what it is to be Jewish. I would never have worked for Jewish organizations, written books on Jewish themes, or in fact, married a rabbi. In short, I would never have become what we call a macher. A macher is an involved Jew, someone whose life is intrinsically intertwined with Jewish community, someone who has opinions and can sometimes be a bit of a pain in the ass. No, if I had more self-esteem, I would have walked long ago. And that's not because I wasn't interested in Judaism when I was growing up. It's because I was interested in Judaism when I was growing up. You see, if you were an adolescent in the 1980s Jewish community in which I grew up, an evident interest in Jewish history, Jewish religion, and Jewish culture was an unmistakable sign of not fitting in. Let me explain my adolescent predicament with a crude masculine heteronormative analogy that is, unfortunately, much too perfect not to use here. Imagine you found yourself a member of a club devoted to the appreciation of classic cars. Imagine that the club held regular meetings in which aficionados gathered to peruse the latest automobile publications. Now imagine that at the first meeting you attend, you find to your bafflement that while all of the publications did contain articles about classic cars, the majority of their pages consisted of photos of naked women in provocative poses. And imagine then that your fellow attendees at club meetings spend very little time actually discussing the automobiles, preferring instead to publicly pleasure themselves to Playboy, Mayfair, and the like. Can you imagine that? What would you do? Well, if you were me, you would loudly and publicly insist on your love of classic cars and pretend that this was actually the primary purpose of the meetings. And all the while inside, you would have wished you had the confidence to perform public autoeroticism. The Jewish youth movements in which I tried and failed to fit into during my 1980s adolescence were such erotic hothouses, and to pretend against all evidence that they were about what they were supposed to be about was the last faith-saving refuge of those of us who could not join the libidinous dance. The best bit of the Jewish summer camp I attended in the Netherlands in 1987 was the visit to Westerbork, the transit camp from which Dutch Jews were sent to Auschwitz, including Anne Frank. There wasn't much left of the camp, but the remains of the railway sidings, a rebuilt watchtower, and the woodland location all made for a somber memorial. And here, for a blissful hour or two, I had a legitimate excuse for not fitting into the social whirligig. My fellow campers performed a simulacra of solitary contemplation, all the while waiting impatiently for the orgy of flirtation to restart. I also performed silent reverence to the martyrs, while dreading the time when I would have to get back on the bus and everything would begin again. In that short period, no one could have outwardly told the difference between myself and the real human beings. As time stood suspended, we were joined in the hypocrisy of public piety. That camp was run by the Zionist youth movement Habanim Dror, and while they do have a Dutch branch, this camp was for British Jewish teens like myself. It was the fourth and final time I attended summer camp, although my first with Habanim. This time, my habit of insisting that a wank mag was a classic car magazine finally became untenable. I was always one of the kids that the madrachim, that is to say the youth leaders, a few years older than myself, loved. I threw myself into the programs they put on, the inventive ways they helped us learn about and discover what it was to be Jewish. Above all, I bought into the idealism and passion which they brought to Jewish life. And it wasn't entirely a lie on my part. British Jewish youth movements, then and now, are engines for British Jewish vitality and often provide the peak experiences that engender a lifetime of Jewish belonging. They aren't what they seem, though. Or rather, they aren't entirely what they seem. Recently, the anti-Semitic conspiracist David Miller took aim at Habanim, arguing that they groom and radicalize Jewish children into supporting Zionism. He pointed to David Baddiel and Sacha Baron Cohen's membership of Habonim and their track records of what he calls racist comedy. The person circled in that picture is Sacha Baron Cohen as a teen in Habonim. Miller also pointed to my old school, Haberdashers' Asks Elstree, which Baddiel and Baron Cohen also attended, as well as Matt Lucas and other British Jewish comedy luminaries. My adolescent milieu was apparently a hothouse of racist indoctrination. Now imagine thinking that Jewish youth movements are actually about Zionism and Judaism. Imagine thinking that Jewish youth culture had a purpose beyond erotic self-perpetuation. In fairness to Miller, it's a delusion shared by many of the people who run Jewish youth movements and those who fund them. It was certainly a delusion shared by my parents and I. We thought I would fit into Habonim because the movement was ideologically socialist Zionist, and I too was left-wing. Am I being too harsh here? Well, if I was writing with my sociologist hat on, I would never make such sweeping generalizations. Habonim might not be representative of all Jewish youth movements then and now, and perhaps those who stayed in the movement past the point that I dropped out became more ideologically motivated. I do know this though, at least at the age of 15, at least in Habonim, there was no social capital available for those like me who showed too much interest in the educational content. No, that would have missed the whole point of what the thing was about. What was it about then? It was certainly about flirtation and copping off. It was certainly about performance and extroversion. It was certainly about being social and valuing banter above all things. This was a social system in which the currency of success was verbal brilliance and the ability to strum an acoustic guitar. But really, then as now, I could never put my finger on what it was to be a Habonim person or a Jewish youth movement person. There was something unnameable, something ingrained in the subculture that excluded me. All I know is that for 2 weeks in the Netherlands in 1987, I was frozen. I couldn't connect. The two friends I went with managed it, but I couldn't. I cried in the toilets. I yearned for suicide. One night I took 4 paracetamols, but my roommates just laughed. I gazed at the road outside our youth hostel and felt crushed at my inability to jump in front of a car. Lacking the courage to kill myself, I was forced into loudly proclaiming the quality of the articles about classic cars. I shone in discussion groups. My earnestness was catnip to the mudjahim and irrelevant to my peers. I performed lamentations for the 6 million just to make myself feel very slightly better. I also ended up bullying the only one lower down on the social scale from me. He had braces, ones that dominated the mouth. He was awkward and gawky. Every time I saw him, I quipped, that flashing glint of steel. Me, I was too redundant to even be worth bullying. On the last night, as always happened, things changed. My friend and I performed a skit at the closing camp show. At the top of the social hierarchy at the camp were 2 kids from Glasgow who had completely bought into the then current popularity of the Beastie Boys, completely failing to get their irony. The kids repeatedly blared out their songs on a boombox, particularly one song called Girls. And on stage, my friend and I performed the song with new words. We ended with the following biting satire. Crap in our records, crap in our music, crap, crap, crap. Somehow it all went down a storm, yet it was too late, of course. I remained frozen, even if my reputation had risen a bit. Yet somehow I'm here, a professional Jew. It did get better. I found my place. I found my people. The route that brought me back is too long and complicated to recount here, but the first step was a stubbornness born of low self-esteem. I've always been the opposite of Groucho Marx. I always want to join clubs that wouldn't have me as a member. And however fucked up that sometimes may be, in the case of the Jewish club, it's an attitude that I'm proud of. We Jews have over 3,000 years of history. We have lived under despotism, feudalism, communism, capitalism, and democracy. We are and have been Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, and many other things. We are Zionist, anti-Zionist, secular, religious, and everything else you could imagine. In that deep and broad history, any one Jewish community and subculture is just a transient thing. To resign my membership from the Jewish people just because I didn't like 1980s British Jewish youth culture would be an act of historical myopia. The social hierarchies at Habonim camp in 1987 mean nothing in the flow of Jewish time. It's ironic, really. My feeling that something was wrong with me led me to stick around the Jewish world after what was the single most miserable experience of my life, and it remains the single most experience of my life. But by sticking around, I eventually became the kind of Jew I wanted to be, part of a community that I've learned to adore. I'm going to end by pushing an already dubious metaphor even further. Yes, I know it is heavily gendered and heteronormative, but, well, let's just say it. Nowadays, no one needs to pretend to read porn mags for the articles on classic cars. You go straight to the source, online most of the time. Porn is porn, classic cars are classic cars. Maybe amidst the brutality of our social media-fueled world, there is the possibility of choice and a liberating honesty. I met my wife at Limud, which, if you don't know it, is a large Jewish conference run every year over the Christmas season. Limud has taken a lot of elements from Jewish youth movement culture. Indeed, many of its leaders have been Madrichim, but there's one important difference. Limud is and was a place where Jews go to couple up. My wife and I are one of the many couples who succeeded. Yet if we never found each other, or indeed anybody else at Limud, it would still have been worthwhile going, because Limud is also unapologetically a place of learning and exploration. One is not subordinate to the other. One is not an excuse for the other. Those who want porn, find porn. Those who want classic cars, find classic cars. And those of us who want both, find both.